one organization cannot solve the problem, right? We have to focus on collaboration over competition. And so often we're working in silos and it just does not work. It has not worked and it will not work. So we have to be intentional about cooperative economics in every aspect of our lifestyle, not just in business, not just in finances, but also in our family, in our mental health, and our physical health. How are we showing up? But do we also have the community around us to empower us to show up as our most authentic selves so that we can all walk in our purpose to build the communities that we desire and need?
Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's. How do you want us to grow? This is all that we know.
Welcome one, welcome all to the very first episode of a program that we like to call Road to Freedom. Road to Freedom is a show all about Black economic empowerment. And through a series of conversations, we're going to explore economic empowerment and its undeniable ties to social justice, education, where we live, the food we eat, and so much more. Road to Freedom is brought to you, of course, by the organization Foundation of Freedom, which is a beautiful, value-aligned community that wants to empower the African diaspora through economic activism and educational resources. We believe that a value-aligned community plus economic empowerment is what leads us to liberation. So on this platform, we want to talk about the things right in front of us that have been holding us back each and every day for generations. I'm your host, David Norville, and we welcome you and we appreciate you for joining us on this Road to Freedom. So today's episode is all about the economics of liberation, which I think is a really great place to plug in for the very first sort of stop along this journey. But of course, I cannot navigate this conversation by myself, which is why I'm joined by these wonderful, beautiful Black people here, and I want to give them a chance to introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. My name is Lloyd Cambridge from Brooklyn, New York. I have a company called Progress Playbook. We work with Black and brown people, low-income folks, to help them to start, build, grow businesses, and also thinking about the intersection between entrepreneurship and neighborhood.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay.
Excellent. Thanks for having us. My name is Ryan Lawrence. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Seven Foundation, where we really focus on education as well as economic empowerment and making sure that we close these gaps, and not only close the gaps, but reverse the gaps such that we may be able to thrive across the entire African diaspora.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this Road to Freedom. My name is Lyndsae Peele. I am the Chief Wealth Officer at Kingdom Vision Consulting, where we provide education and financial literacy resources for Black and brown entrepreneurs, focusing on both personal and business finance.
Okay. Beautiful. It's so great to have all of you here to help provide a little bit more background and context and even a bit of storytelling as we get into this topic, right? So if I'm saying the economics of liberation, what do I really mean when I'm saying that? I kind of want to plug into this idea of cooperative economics, which is something that we might frequently hear in this very Black wealth consciousness space. But I want to actually start with you, Lyndsae, and ask a very general question, right? Like when you hear that phrase cooperative economics, like what do you imagine? What do you see? How might we see cooperative economics in our day-to-day lives already?
It really takes me back to, as a child, I would hear my parents and my grandparents say it takes a village to raise a child, but I think we left it there and we forgot that it takes a village to build a business. It takes a village to build a community. It takes a village to build us internally, right? We were not put on this earth to do life alone. That means we were not put here to do our business alone, to figure out our finances alone. It truly takes the community around us. I teach my clients often that it is very hard to build wealth without having a winning wealth team. You cannot do it alone. You do not meet millionaires, billionaires, executives and CEOs of billion-dollar companies who don't have a full team around them. However, for us, I feel like we've gone through so much as a community that we struggle with trusting each other. So it's really hard to kind of ignite that and to light the fuel to that. However, the only way that us as a community are going to get where we're trying to go it's not going to happen until we actually start working together.
I see, certainly. There's something there when I think about cooperative economics that is in one sense very technical, but on another sense, has to do with a bit of a mindset and the way that we think about,
100%.
what exactly the landscape is and how we're operating. Did you want to get in there a little bit?
Yeah, I was about to say mindset is the most important piece.
Got you.
It matters not about money, which is just a tool, right? Like
Correct.
as an idea, it starts with the mindset. And this is going to pour into some other things that we discuss. But we have to talk about the financial and economic trauma that we have been through and heal, right? It is an evolution and revolution that is taking place within our communities where we are starting to embrace therapy and some other things, although I would say in a more quote unquote professional sense, if you will, outside of the barbershops, right? Outside of the salons, outside of these areas. But one thing that we neglect most of the time is actually, what did it look like growing up? What is my relationship with money, right? Am I that child or that person that heard about someone's parent putting a phone bill or a cable bill in their name and it went into collections and something didn't happen, right? So I'm not going to do that anymore. Credit is bad, all of these things. So it is going to take us to really reshape our mindset and shift that paradigm and then open ourselves up to the idea of investing, open up ourselves to the idea of there's going to be volatility, right? And then open up ourselves to the idea that a lot of the things that we learn, we have to unlearn and then relearn, because savings, believe it or not, does not get us where we need to get to. And I'm just going to throw this in here. Over a 35-year period, if inflation is at 2%, you lose 50% of your purchasing power. How are we going to overcome that? And as a community, that is something that we have to discuss, because it matters not one's education, which they've done plenty of studies on, resources and things. We as a community are not as engaged in the investment and wealth building space on the financial side. We do a lot of things in the wealth building space on the spiritual side and building community. So now we have to pair those two together such that we can actually start building this road to freedom.
See, I mean, that was
Wow.
I feel like you said it all right there. That's
You
the
did.
show. No, one of the things that I really appreciate about some of the things that you all are doing here is the activity that you have in the community as it relates to at least getting people on board to be able to cooperate, whether it be economically or otherwise. So you Lloyd, you mentioned the Progress Playbook, and just reading a little bit about it myself, I've just been so basically floored to learn about the business and learn about Progress Playbook. I read the mission statement, right? So to equip entrepreneurs to design the business, life, and the world that they love. And I would love to know, as it relates to some of your experiences building Progress Playbook and really doing that work, where do you see cooperative economics sort of coming into your mission and your strategy and your day-to-day?
Yeah, I think if we define, my definition of cooperative economics, when you break down those two words, like economics to me is about the management of resources. Number one, right? So I think that's the first thing we need to understand. And the second thing is like the cooperative is about us coming together to be able to ultimately manage those resources again, to be able to achieve a specific purpose. And I think that purpose is always around the well-being of people. It's about human, as my pastor says, human flourishing. So how can we come together to be able to collectively manage our resources so that we can all flourish, essentially? And I think that, and then also with cooperative economics, I think the power of it is that it helps to accelerate that end objective of us all flourishing. So, with Progress Playbook, we design entrepreneurship programs, incubators, accelerators that help Black and brown people to start and build businesses. And we really care about not only being able to increase income, but also thinking about how to build places. So the intersection, again, between neighborhoods and and entrepreneurship. So one program that we have three programs. One of them is called Start an Empire, our first program for young people that really helps young people to identify problems in their neighborhoods, social problems, and figure out how they're going to solve those problems through business. So it can be mental health, it can be gun violence. So they would literally form business plans and launch pop-up shops in their neighborhoods to, to solve problems, but do it collectively. And one thing that I really love about that program is that they do it as a team. So most times, when we're starting businesses, we think about like, I'm going to do this by myself, but I do need to build a team. So we do want them to kind of get into this mindset of like, when you're building something, that you need to do it as a collective, because everyone has different skill sets that's going to be able to help the organization accelerate and grow and ultimately achieve this goal of the residents or neighborhood or community to flourish. And that kind of like is kind of a thread throughout all that we do, is to ensure that we're building community, leveraging skill sets and resources for that ultimate purpose. Yeah.
I really like the way you phrased the way we're thinking about economics, how we're managing resources. And, from my own perspective, it feels as though generally in the Black community, when it comes to our resources, the idea is kind of like, well, let's make do with what we have. That's how we manage the resources. And I think there's something here about, okay, yes, but how can we continue to magnify? How can we continue to expand and grow and things like that? I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think maybe the first sort of type of cooperative economics that I was introduced to, I know at least in the Caribbean community, we call it partner, like that thing where you kind of just, all right, let me send you $100 a week, and then this week you get this, and this week you get that. That was something that I know helped me and helped my family a lot, and our relative communities a lot as well. I think on a very fundamental level, that can kind of clue us into some of the methods and ways that we can go about it, or go about our cooperative economics. But I think there's something maybe a little bit more higher level that we can get into. Lyndsae, I want to go back to you, and maybe can you share with us a little bit about the ways that you've seen cooperative economics work in your own daily life, either from an idealistic perspective or just in real life experience?
Sure. So I think it's important for me to lay the foundation of who I am and my experiences. So I grew up on the back of a small business, which is why I'm very intentional about entrepreneurship in our communities, because I truly believe that we cannot win our way to wealth through just a 9 to 5. It's great. I'm not saying to leave your job to start a business. Hey, I'm a dualpreneur. I work full time and I manage my business, right? But they're both aligned with my mission and who I am personally. My father's a plumber and my mom has been running the business for over 20 years. So I was able to really see the community garner around them to build this business, especially because my parents had me after the age of 40. So all of my siblings are at least 20 plus years my senior. The closest one to me is 13 years. So it took a cooperative, a family, a community to make sure that this child that they was bringing in could have a sustainable life, right? Throughout my tenure in the financial space, I started within the retail banking community. So I've worked in every role in your traditional bank branch, from a teller to a branch manager and everything in between. And what I saw, the challenges between Black businesses and businesses that did not reflect what we look like, is that they already knew the importance of cooperative economics. They already knew the importance of circulating the dollar in their community. Their accountant looked like them. Their banker, if they could, look like them, right? Their insurance agent looked like them. But their customers also look like them. They were intentional about that. But for us, we operate from a space of a scarcity mindset, right? But also, too, we're struggling with trusting each other, right? And that's been embedded in us in our foundation a long time, just going back to slavery, right? Being able to separate us, like those who are in the house versus those who are in the field. And it's like really just even thinking about where we came from, right? Those things are still very much so a part of who we are today. So for me, I am trying to intentionally dispel those things, right? Not to forget that they happened, but to acknowledge them, to address them, so that we can all heal together to repair our communities together. A portion of my work too, I am the entrepreneurial ecosystem manager for Kiva US. So we're an international microlending nonprofit organization, and specifically here in the United States, we have a small business loan product, 0% interest, zero collateral, no fees necessary, no minimum credit score, no minimum business revenues necessary, right? And it's through crowdfunding, and it forces you to be a part of your community and to rally the people around you to support you. So a part of our underwriting is through social underwriting. Can you get your community to help support your business, which is a main part of the process and how you can get fully funded through the loan? And even just thinking about that in my role currently, I support a portfolio of about 40 organizations who house our loan products and our 45 plus staff members. And a big part of what we do is building communities around these entrepreneurs. Again, they can't do it alone, right? But also too, one organization cannot solve the problem, right? We have to focus on collaboration over competition. And so often we're working in silos and it just does not work. It has not worked and it will not work. So we have to be intentional about cooperative economics in every aspect of our lifestyle, not just in business, not just in finances, but also in our family, in our mental health, in our physical health. How are we showing up? But do we also have the community around us to empower us to show up as our most authentic selves so that we can all walk in our purpose to build the communities that we desire and need?
Wow. There's a lot of stuff there. And I kind of want to, in the moment, reflect back some of the things that I was hearing from you. I mean, there's this idea of being able to trust, being able to work together as a team. And there's something very, very vulnerable and psychological as well that goes into that. There's a certain amount of, like you're saying, trauma to be able to hurdle in order for us to be able to do that. And it leads me to think about the education that is necessary. I mean, this is an educational platform. We have educational intentions here for this show. And what's so difficult is when it comes to this material and we're trying to learn, it requires a lot of truth telling and a lot of just going through history that's so painful to look at and believe and metabolize and all those things. But it's completely necessary, right, to be exposed to those things so that we can learn. One of the questions that I have that I would love to hear a little bit from everybody about is thinking about the role of educational institutions, which we can use that quite broadly, right? I mean, I'm sure you all in your day-to-day lives educate people, whether it's through an actual organized like entity or just talking to somebody on the side of the road. So I'm just wondering for you all, what role do you think these like educational institutions can play as it relates to our learning about cooperative economics? We can start with you.
Yeah, I kind of want to address one thing about just the narrative, I think, about Black people not working together, which I don't always think is, or having trust, which for me, I don't think is always the case. And I think we need to be really careful, kind of like going back to this concept of economic activism, which is really about being intentional with like how you spend your resources. I think you also need to be intentional about the words that we kind of speak over ourselves and being able to change the narrative that we don't trust each other or that we don't work together. When, I've had my company for 8 years, my accountant is Black, my partners are Black. I try to hire Black folks as much as possible. This room that we're in right now is also Black. So I think a part of this is changing narratives, looking for those stories where we are upholding those values, like being able to storytell. I think storytelling is a great way to educate. So I want to see more of a shift of a narrative from we don't do this to like, actually we do it. We do it all the time.
Yeah.
We need to highlight and showcase those examples and the power of it. Like I have an exchange. I just paid somebody over, $75,000 a partner by last year just because she's a dope project manager and she's Black.
There you go.
Yeah. And we exchange business all the time. Wow. And that's the power of it. Like really looking at our supply chain, like who am I using for my graphic designer? Who am I using? That's about being intentional in terms of how we're using our resources, and that is cooperative economics. That is economic activism.
I see. Thank you for that.
To build on that though, right? Both things are absolutely true. In terms of holistically, there is distrust within the community that is built on the backside of our relationship with money. And if we want to go back a few years, we did trust each other significantly, right? When we go back to the 60s and things, but what partly took away part of that trust was integration. And we want to be real about it, because then that allowed for certain people, certain things that we were all wanting that progress. But then with that progress, there came some sacrifices. And those sacrifices were reduction of Black businesses, reduction of reliance within the people that were in your community. That common unity that we did have started to degrade some. Then you tied that into the manipulation through media and increased advertisement and things of that nature. So in duality, both things are true. And I do agree with us starting to shift the narrative in terms of, yes, we are doing this, and there is room for increase. There is room for growth, right? And part of that does come from exposure coupled with education, right? We just met today, really, although I'm pretty sure I've seen you walking, but until this point in time, yeah, we're value aligned in what we do. We're value aligned in what we do. However, do we know? How can we then start to build that holistic community where we then start to support each other even more? And that was slightly easier to do in those times where everybody's in the community. This is this small business. This is where you had to go. This is the person that fixed your clothes. You went to their house. Or this is the actual corner store that is a corner room in someone's house, right? And this is where grandma used to go. And this is where auntie went. And that's where my sister also went, right? And then this idea of institutions, just to tie it back to your question as well, and I'm going to pass the mic back to you, is that the primary institution is the house. That is the institution, right? Your first educators are those individuals, i.e. your parents, your guardians, whomever. That is the institution. And then from there, we can expand. But a lot of the things and trauma that we are dealing with, as well as the healing that we're dealing with, as well as the messages that we're pushing, that's where they start, right? That 0 to 5 window, that 5 to 10 window, where habits are actually truly being formed then. So this conversation is why we're here, right? To meet those connections, to build together, and then start to build those empires, right? And it's going to take us, again, being intentional about making sure that if it's for us and we're saying that it's about us, to make sure that then we're doing right by us by working together.
Got you. Wow.
That's good.
I'm going to let you get in there too.
That's good. A couple of things. When we think about education in general, I think we naturally just start thinking about institutions.
Yeah, school.
But we automatically just start thinking about that. But you're right. You hit on a very important point. Our first experience is in the house, right? But then once we step outside of the house, it's our communities, it's the churches that we're in, right? And what are we listening to from the pulpit, right? It's the people that are around our families. What are we hearing inside of their household? What is their logic? What is their rhetoric, right? Because all of that becomes ultimately a part of our educational experience. And then we expound on that, right? We diversify our level of education when we start to go to different schools, right? And I am a proud HBCU alum. I am very grateful for my Howard University, because Howard showed me that I was very capable of being this amazing Black woman and to show up in all spaces as my most authentic self. But I didn't learn that in high school. I didn't learn that in middle school. Honestly, I didn't really learn that in the community for real, because a lot of people around me struggled with their confidence, right? A lot of people around me they didn't have the community, right, support to help them realize who they were inside. A lot of us are fighting with who we are and not understanding who we are as individuals. So it directly impacts how we show up in the world, how we educate ourselves, what type of education we allow ourselves to consume, right? But also, what are we giving out to? Because we are all a part of each other's educational experience, whether we think so or not. So it's important to have a very intentional desire, right, to be educated from various people about various things. And then you like they say, eat the chicken and throw away the bone. You take what applies to you, like what's relatable,
right.
and you kind of get rid of the rest. But at least you've heard that perspective. At least you're now open and aware of the differences that do exist, because multiple things can exist at the same time, but it's all still a part of our overall educational experience.
Wow. This is rich. This is really rich. I mean, I want to go even all the way back to what you were saying. And I love the back and forth here, because I felt there was a bit of like this going on where like it's not necessarily you contradict one another, but you build and fill out more of what we're trying to understand, right? Like if we're thinking about economics as what we do with the resources, what we do starts with the way we're even looking at it and talk about it and see about it. Like, you know, so it's like,
and knowing that our resources are not limited, right? A lot of us just believe that because some of us, and it's not everyone, but some of us operate with the scarcity mindset that we feel like money is going to dry up, right? We feel like we're just not going to have access to the things that we need, when that's not true, right? Resources are truly unlimited. But do you believe that? And if you don't believe that, then it's going to be hard for you to see that and to ultimately obtain that.
That's why we need examples.
yeah.
And everything is also like spiritual first, and then it manifests into the
100%.
physical. And like when you look at spiritual things like mindset or how you talk to yourself, your beliefs, your values, which is why like we got to be careful about like what we say to ourselves, and also what we say about each other is like, you know, kind of going back to this whole spiritual thing, like call those things that are not as though they were. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to say, oh, you are poor or you have a scare. I'm going to speak life. It's always about building people up first spiritually through your words, you know, and then that's going to, it can be expressed economically, because I have a certain value system in terms of how I see myself, my worldview in terms of how I experience the world and my ability through what was spoken over me and spoken to me. So that's why I want to be careful about, and that's education too, be careful about what I say to Black folks or young people about themselves, even their history, you know, first, and then kind of layer on top of that all of the other kind of economic tools like creating a budget, knowing how to manage it. But first, it is that spiritual education.
I see. We're getting close to the end of this insightful conversation, and you know, one of the things this leads me to think of is because you mentioned integration, which is not only its own episode but its own series, right? Thinking about the economics of integration. I mean, we could look at even one decade and talk about it for several hours. And it reminds me of this book, which is such a pivotal reference point for Foundation of Freedom, Claude Anderson's Powernomics. That plan, the road to empower Black America. And you know, so in the book he talks about a bunch of different economic action steps, and I'll just read three, right? So the first one he mentions creating an alternative economy within Black communities. Number two, he talks about dominating business ownership and management, where Black people are the majority consumer population. And three, also he talks about, you know, focusing on wealth building and restoring the economic intent of the original civil rights laws. Of course, we don't have time to go into all of those things now, but I would want to hear maybe quickly if we can go around and talk about, you know, what are some strategies for ensuring economic activism leads to long-term sustainable change, right? Whether that be a macroeconomic thing that we're talking about or like a day-to-day thing that each and every person can do.
If I can
It's a
start,
simple question, right?
Well, I mean, the primary key is really and truly going to be politics. If we look at that, right, because If we go back to where we were in the 60s, if we fast forward to 2021, 2022, 2023, in terms of where we are economically from a percent perspective, not much has actually changed. What has indeed changed is that there are less Black people and people of color that are in poverty, but home ownership rates and a whole host of other things have yet to fully manifest themselves moving forward. So we then have to take our economic pieces because other communities are doing it, and we've seen that, especially recently with what is happening in the current political environment. They're mobilizing their dollars. They are getting laws and things on books. They're having that change there. And that's really and truly, to me, going to be that piece that takes our economics and then makes it sustainable, right? There are studies that came out that say, 90% of Black people within that study thought that local politics were more important than national. But do we see that reverberating within our community? And if we don't, then how can we make sure that we put action behind that to then directly impact not only our lives, but then the generations that come after, such that they're able to take advantage of those benefits. So, yeah, and we'll throw taxes and all those other things in there too, just as a little drop.
Got you.
That's
Any
good.
final
And
thoughts?
I just want to jump in there because I agree 110%. But one thing I don't want us to ever miss is that it takes financial wealth to be able to truly back those things because
Agreed.
a lot of politicians, right? Yes, the vote matters, but it's the money really
dark
that's
money,
backing
yeah.
these campaigns that truly matter and make a difference. The dollar talks, right? The dollar
Facts.
moves everything. But even when we think about from a philanthropic perspective, and we wonder why our nonprofit organizations, especially our grassroots organizations, struggle sometimes a little bit more than others, right? But because they have people in their communities with the dollar that can invest and just throwing money. These foundations, corporations are throwing money in certain organizations, but a lot of times they don't want to fund broke people, right? Let's also understand that. So we have to bring something to the table. Yes, our ideas are amazing. They're important and they will help get us to a certain extent, right? But we also have to bring the financials with it, right?
Agreed.
But that's why it's important for us who are in these spaces and places and that are producing wealth for ourselves and for our families to put our money back into the communities, not just where we shop, right, and how we spend our dollars, but also how are we investing those dollars, right, into other small businesses, into nonprofits, but also backing the politicians that we need to take care of us.
I'm going to say, if this is all about the management of resources, I think it starts with each individual person managing their own resources. And I think that there are three purposes of money, in my opinion. The first one is to invest. So how am I going to leverage? So if I have $1, I'm going to take maybe 10% of that, 10 cents, to invest in the stock market, to invest in whatever, so I can get a return. Another part of that, another purpose of money is to consume. I need to, buy clothes and food and all these other things, pay my taxes, and then the third part to me is to be able to give, right? So I'm going to leverage some of that money to be able to give to the nonprofits, to give to these causes, to help to increase the human flourishing of people in my neighborhood or wherever, or the causes that I care about. So I think, when it comes to thinking about your personal resources and what you can do is simply start with a budget. I looked, and I'm guilty of this, but last year I made a lot of money, and I looked at how much money I spent on Ubers. I'm like, I spent way too much money on Uber, way too much money, and some of that money could have went to the causes and the nonprofits in my neighborhood that I really care about. So today, normally I would have got on the bus. I would have taken the Uber. Today, to get here, I got on the bus. And I always tell my friend, I don't like the bus. I'm not getting on the bus. But, I'm really intentional about my own resource and the management of my own resources and how I can now leverage that $22 that I would have spent to get here, spent $250 to get here or whatever it is, $275. So I saved X number of dollars that can now be used to maybe $5 goes into my Robinhood account. Another $10 that I would have spent to get here goes to that local nonprofit. But that also is a mindset and me being intentional first about managing my personal resources through a budget.
And I want to say again, right? Resources, although we're talking about economics, is not just limited to money.
Facts.
Because we as a people have so much resources, right? How can I then leverage the knowledge that you have? How can we build upon this? How can we collaborate and work together and use our own individual wealth, our own individual expertise, right? Our own individual spirituality to then grow and build? Because at the heart of this, going back to what you mentioned, right, is this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I can't talk to you about investing if you can't see yourself making it to 25.
That's right.
So,
That's
and
right.
that's a key piece that has to come back to the conversation, right? How can we work together to make sure that within our communities that we are well? And that's when economics and things of that nature are really going to thrive. And then we won't be trying to just survive, right? We won't just be trying to survive. We'll make sure that we are indeed building that empire and building that road to freedom.
Leveraging social capital.
Come
You
on
know,
now.
who you know.
Who you
Right?
know.
They can get you
Who
in
you know.
places and spaces.
sure.
It's important.
Right.
Well, I think we're gonna have to leave it there. Lloyd, Ryan, Lyndsae, truly appreciate you for joining us for this very first episode of Road to Freedom. We have a few more episodes coming out, and if you want to learn more or possibly get involved, visit offreedom.org or find us on Instagram. But yeah, thanks so much for listening and joining us on this Road to Freedom, and we will see you next time.